And welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so as you can see from the title page, we're doing an episode of the show on my favourite mad Swede. Yes, it's that time of the year again when it's time to do an episode of the show on Smogen, as I've collected enough samples to warrant doing a show. And I mean, so ordinarily it tends to be that I will do an episode of the show on Smogen and combine it with Mac Myra, because Pa doesn't release that many bottlings per year, so it just takes a little while before I've got enough together to do an episode of the show. And for once I sort have. You probably can see from the title pages that there's obviously 4 Smogen releases, but there's a couple of bottles there that have the name Kinghaven. Now these are quite interesting actually, and you're probably wondering what the connection is. Well, obviously the connection is Pa, and this is sort of, I guess, a private bottling to a certain extent. And what Pa has decided to do with these 2 releases is to rum releases. I don't know whether they're single casks or not. I would probably guess they actually are, but so it's sort of Pa's kind of new toy, I suppose. And when I saw the labels, I'll be honest and thought I'm a bit disappointed by how relatively bland they are. I mean, at the end of the day, okay, I don't mind a sort of a modern style label with plenty of information and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be particularly fancy and outrageous and or what have you. But I just thought they just looked a little bit bland, and certainly compared to the Smogen labels, which I think are really quite smart. But anyway, of course, packaging, frippery, labelling, it's all generally quite irrelevant, because at the end of the day, it's what's the juice in the bottle like. That's the most important part of it. And yes, okay, so some bottles may well not be as visually appealing on the shelf, but the point being is, if the juice is appealing, then you just have to convince customers that they are indeed worth purchasing. But anyway, I'm going to. Well, I'll talk about the range obviously in a second, but we'll obviously kick off with the rums and then move into the Big Peat and Sherry and what have you in due course. But so this is, like I said, this is Pa's sort of new baby, I guess, and there's probably not a great deal much to say, other than I'll introduce the lineup, and because they're all incredibly alcoholic, as they have a tendency to be, my butt is well filled and it may well take some time. So let's look at the lineup. Right, okay, so as I said, we're going to kick off with the 2 rum bottlings. Now the first one we're looking at is an 8-year-old Guyana from the Diamond Distillery. Now, if you remember, I did an episode of the show on Eldorado probably some time ago, and obviously Eldorado is produced at the Diamond Distillery, and as you know, the Diamond Distillery has become a bit of a museum, a working museum of stills that were originally at other distilleries in Guyana. So this it all comes off the Port Morant wooden stills, so it should be quite interesting. And as you know, the Eldorado range tends to be a blend. You don't often tend to see, other than in the independents, bottlings from the single stills that they have. So this was finished for 8 months in Swedish oak, and why not? Let's add a bit of a Swedish twist to the rum. It's bottled at 61% and was bottled earlier this year, I believe. The second of the Kinghaven rums we're going to be looking at is from the Foursquare Distillery in Barbados. This is a 13-year-old, bottled at 63.4. Oof, nothing like starting off with a night light ones, is there? Again, finished, I don't know for quite how long, but I would guess probably the same period of time, in Swedish oak. And it is the usual makeup from the Foursquare Distillery, as in pot and column still, molasses based, etc, etc. So there are the two rums, and we will start with those. Then we're going to move on to some whiskey. So the first bottling we'll be looking at is this one. This is the Single Cask 56 2011. It's a 7-year-old, bottled at 62.4%. And initially aged in a fresh bourbon barrel before being finished in a rum cask. Why not? I think this was released before the rum, so I don't know what rum cask he finished it in. Whether he did a previous bottling of rum, I honestly don't know. But anyway, like I said, bottled at 62.4%. So as per the norm, lots of alcohol. Right, second bottle we'll be looking at is now venturing into the sherry realms. Yes, indeed. So this is another single cask. This was released in March of last year. This is the 51 2011, 6-year-old, bottled at 64%. Distilled in October of 2011 in actual fact. So single sherry hogshead, as you can see. Looks like sherry cask whiskey to me. Next bottling we'll be looking at is this one. This is the Sherry Quarters 2.2. 5 years old. It was distilled in 2013, bottled at some stage in last year, and bottled at 61%. And as the name suggests, it was matured in sherry quarter casks. And finally, a new bottling, well, as well as the two Kinghaven bottlings. This is the Smogen 2011 8-year-old. I think it's probably, I mean, I don't know if I'm right in saying, but I guess it's got to be close to sort of the oldest release. It's the oldest release as far as I can think of spirit from the Power has produced. So this was distilled in March of 2011, bottled in April of this year, and was aged in a selection of first fill Sauternes barriques. So and bottled at a very small, a very light ABV of 57.8, which is actually quite light for Smogen, isn't it, really, when you think about it. So that's the lineup. I think it's just going to be really interesting. I mean, yeah, I've grown to love Power's whiskies. I mean, you can certainly you can't say that they don't lack intensity, personality, and they're just generally quite mad and dangerous and yeah, damn good. So I'm really looking forward to this, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this review. So let's kick off with a little bit of rum then, shall we? Okay, so let's kick off with the Port Morant 8-year-old. Let's see what nose gives us on this then, shall we? Classic oily Guyanan dried fruits. Little bit of agricole herbal notes just sort of in the background. Burnt sugar, clove, cinnamon, touch of dark honey. I mean, and a little bit of tannin. I often find when I've tasted the rums produced on the wooden still, and I don't know whether this is just sort of because it's been distilled on a wooden still, I get quite a bit of woody notes, and there's a fair amount there, but it's that sort of estery, sort of oily Guyanan fruit that's really at the forefront, and it's just kind of, it is just an absolute classic. I can sort of get a little bit of Swedish oak, a little bit of tighter grain tannin. I mean, you've got to kind of work to find it, but overall it's an astonishingly complex nose for an 8-year-old. Although, as we well know, sort of, you know, that equates to, you know, because of the heat in Guyana, a lot more maturity than its, you know, aged Scotch would be at this age. So, touch of violet. little bit of molassy kind of sugar kind of coming out now. That is an absolutely stunning nose. See what the pal's like. Wow, that's a herbally kind of finish. Wow, that certainly was pretty intense, little putty cat. Hello. Right, yes, so kicks off again with that sort of classic oily Guyanan dried fruit characters, a little bit of petrol, touch of spice, a lot of alcohol, but wow, it's got so much kind of richness and honeyed sweetness that it really balances it up quite nicely. A little bit of violets, nutmeg, clove, really lovely finish. Again, I'm getting a nice sort of woodiness, but like I said, that's kind of balanced by the sweetness of the dried fruit and the honey. There's a little bit of tight tannin, a little bit of almost coffee tannin as well. But wow, I mean, my God, that's intense. So let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does. Yes, little putty cat. Okay, let's see what the nose is like now. Sweeter, still fairly oily. Never work with cats. A little bit more apricot-y fruit, a little touch more banana possibly. Getting a little bit more of that violetiness as well. Less oak. Maybe a touch of burnt sugar now. I mean that's a lovely nose, either with or without water. See what the pal's like now. Still quite oily, a little bit more estery. Water has certainly brought out the sweetness a little bit more. It's also brought out a little bit of bitterness from the oak, but again that is balanced really nicely by the sweetness of the dried fruit. A little bit of vanilla. Oh, that's stunning rum. That is great rum, it has to be said. Okay, so let's move on to the 13-year-old Foursquare. So let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Completely different, and that's one of the things I love about rums. Each island country, you know, the rum is just so different. This is big, spicy, raisiny, sultanery, sort of dried fruit, molasses, dried fig, milk chocolate. Can't say I'm getting an awful lot of any sort of Swedish oak character, it has to be said, because the rum is really sort of, you know, intense and boisterous, and it's just kind of just as you would expect a Barbados rum to be, sort of full of character and really nutty and intense and molassy and dark. Touch burnt wood. Oh, stunning. Another great cask, it has to be said. Let's see what the pal's like. Rich, sweet, juicy raisins, fig, plum, autumnal fruits. Quite tight, very tannic on the mid palate. Toasty oak, slightly bit of spices, bit of chocolate, pepper. Wow, what a mouthful! I mean, the intensity, the spices are just going mad. You know, it is really incredible. Getting some kind of almost kind of praline-y kind of notes now, as sort of like the oak is kind of just kind of coming back on the finish. But wow, what an intense mouthful. I mean, yeah, lots of alcohol, but again, lots of balancing sweetness. It's not too alcoholic. I mean, you can certainly feel it. I mean, you know, what was it? 63.4%. I mean, you know, this is not going to be a shy and retiring rum, it has to be said. So let's put a little drop of water with that and see if it makes any changes to it or not. Hasn't made a great deal of difference to the nose. It's still pretty much the same. It's dark, it's raisinated. It's maybe a little bit more oak now, a little bit more toastiness possibly, but you know, I'm getting a bit of wood smoke as well. But yeah, not really a great deal of change. So see if it's made any difference to the palate. Sweeter, oilier, rounder, less obviously intense on the alcohol front, but still slightly quite spicy, still quite dark, quite chewy. A little bit more oak now on the certainly on the finish. Again, it has that praline, hazelnutty kind of character. But wow, that is stunning. I mean, you know. And unfortunately, I can't sell you a bottle of either of them because a certain rather well-known online whiskey company appears to have bought the bloody lot. But anyway, big thank you anyway to Robert from Highfern that distributes Smogen in the UK for the samples, and they are just absolutely stunning. I mean, both of those rums are just ooh, expensive, I know, but ooh, they are. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Single Cask 56 2011 rum finished. So no, nice kind of fade into the to the whiskies, I think. So quite elegant. Barleyed, tangerine, orange, a little bit of rummy dried fruit, oily. Not a peat monster. There is a good dollop of peat there. It's a sort of an oily, slightly tarry kind of peat. Hints of sour apple, cinnamon, more tar, little medicinal note in the background. I mean, that is stunning. I mean, what a great nose. You can smell that sort of slightly creamy, sort of rummy fruit in the background, and you know the balance again is just absolutely superb, absolutely spot on. Got the pulse note. Opens up with sweet, creamy, vanilla-y oak, rummy dried fruits, barley, touch of spice. Peat moves in nicely on the middle, drying, earthy peat, a little bit of medicinal note. Tannins are quite grippy again on the finish. They are certainly enhanced by, excuse me, the alcohol. A little bit of coffee, a little bit of licorice, hickory. Really, really lingering, really moorish, really intense. and again a lovely balance between the two different cask types and the spirit character. I mean that's stunning, absolutely stunning. Yes, you can count how many times I use the word stunning in this tasting, because it will probably be an awful lot. Anyway, let's put a little drop of water with that and see what that does. Grainier, slightly more high toned. It's kind of giving it an almost kind of column stilly kind of character. Obviously I know Pa distills in a pot still, a leaky old pot still at that, and but it just has that sort of graininess. It's obviously the rum character giving it that feeling. I mean, certainly with old grain whiskies, and not necessarily majorly old grain whiskies, they can sort of develop that kind of rummy kind of dried fruit character, and this is kind of, I suppose, aping that sort of like grain whiskey like kind of character. A little rawer possibly, a little bit more barley, a little bit more young barley, but and a little bit less peat, as is often the case when you put a little drop of water with peated malts. Anyway, let's see what that's like. Oilier, young, a little bit of rose petal, raw cereal. I personally prefer this neat. I mean, it's still an absolutely stunning whiskey, it has to be said. The water just kind of removes some of the intensity, and sort of kind of, I wouldn't say shows up its flaws, because I don't really feel it has flaws, but it shows up its kind of youthfulness. And although it's a really intense mouthful when it is neat, you're just getting all of that intensity, all of the character, and with a bit of water it just kind of like, yeah, it softens it up to a certain degree, but just kind of removes some of the fun, to be honest with you. So but either way, I mean, bloody good cask. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the sherried bottlings. This is the Single Cask 51 2011, so let's see what those gives us on this. Interesting, quite violety, barleyed, not a huge sherry monster, it has to be said. There is some sherry dried fruits. It feels more like a refill cask. There's a touch of smoke, a touch of rose petal. I mean, there's a kind of, I mean, it's sort of, I suppose, in a way, kind of, if I was to say it's a bit like a peated Auchentoshan, not that that actually exists in reality, but you kind of get where I'm coming from. It's got that sort of sweet, rose petally, slightly strawberry moussey kind of note, with a good dollop of sort of earthy peat, and sort of subtle-ish background sherry. There's a little bit of dried grape, green olives, wood smoke. I mean, yeah, it's an impressive whiskey, it has to be said. And yeah, for a sherry cask whiskey, it's got lots of character. And you know, that's what I want from my whiskies. I want character and personality, and a little bit of madness as well. You know, that doesn't hurt. Anyway, let's see what the pal's like. Full, barley, really chocolatey. It's got that kind of toffee, chocolatey kind of character. Again, a little bit of rose petal, some chunky peat. And again, it kind of has that sort of slightly sort of peated Auchentoshan-y kind of character. Touch of wood spice, a little bit of bitter oak on the finish, a little masked, obviously, because of the level of alcohol. Really mouth-filling, mouth-watering as well. It has to be said. It's like, oh wow, the intensity is kind of off the scale. It has to be said. I mean, that is really impressive for a sherry whiskey. It has to be said. Lots of complexity, not just sherry. There's a lot more going on there than just that. So let's have a look at the nose now. Pretty much as it was neat, still quite chocolatey. A little bit less of the sherry intensity, which is not a bad thing. Still quite rose petally. Still quite a fair amount of peat. Some nice apricot kind of barley character coming through. Yeah, a little lighter possibly, but pretty much the same. It has to be said. Let's see what the parts like now. Softer, sweeter, more barley, a little bit more treacly sort of notes kind of coming through now that I've diluted it a little bit. Still quite spicy, still quite intense, peppery, slightly herbal on the finish. Again, the balance I think is really very good with this. Yes, there's the sherry character, but you know, a little drop of water has just kind of softened that intensity. And like I said, even when neat, it sort of had a more refill sherry kind of character as opposed to sort of a stonking first fill Oloroso character. Balance is beautiful. Peat kind of comes through right on the finish. I mean, you know, this has character. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, it is a stunning whiskey. I mean, I know they're not cheap, and I suppose I wish they were a little bit cheaper because they might make them a little bit easier to sell. But you know, they are really unique whiskies, and you know, damn, that's good. Okay, so let's move on to the Sherry Quarters 2.2. Now, look at the colour on that. I mean, that's dark. Anyway, let's just see what those gives us. Damn, that's a big nose full of sherry. Tarry, grapey, almost kind of PX-y in character, but not quite so sort of rich and sort of sweet. Really herbal, smoky, peaty, raisin, prune. Yeah, it's a little bit more heavy on the sherry character than the previous bottling, which is, I suppose, not a surprise considering, you know, sherry quarter casks. It's tarry, it's intense, it's kind of sort of a sensory overload of peat and sherry, you know, it's just sort of, you know, really wild. See what it parts like. Got that alcohol and the tannins kind of sucking the moisture out of my mouth. It's intense. Again, rich, dark, pruny, very PX-like, herbal, green olives, green nuts, intense sherry, intense peat, earthy, slightly medicinal peat, wood spice, burnt wood, rubber tar. I mean, oh my God, that. Oh, I mean, you know, you want your senses battered. I mean, yeah, stunning. I mean, you know, it kind of, to a certain extent, kind of goes against the grain of everything I look for in a whiskey. Yeah, I mean, it has balance. Don't get me wrong. I mean, but it is all intense sherry and peat, but intense. I mean, you know, if you're gonna sort of piss around. Oops, sorry. Shouldn't say naughty words. If you're gonna play around with peat and sherry, you know, bloody well make it sort of intense, make it sort of smack you in the face and sort of go, look, big sherry, big peat, you know, and that's, I mean, it's just, you can't not taste that whiskey and not go, oh my God, that's intense, because, you know, it is. Anyway, let's put a little drop of water with that and see if that mitigates any of the sherry. I'm guessing probably not, considering the amount of sherry on display. But let's see what the nose is like now. Oh, I'm getting loads of burnt raisins, treacle. In actual fact, I mean, more often than not, you tend to put a little drop of water with the peated malts, and the peat tends to sort of dissipate out a bit. Not with this. This peat is going absolutely nowhere. It's intense. A little bit of dark chocolate now, a little bit of wood spice, even a bit of fish oil. Yeah, a bit of, not quite coastal, but fishy, oily, sort of castor oily, sort of, yeah, whatever the oil is they get from fish. Fish oil. Yeah, slightly more manure now as well. I'm getting a bit more stinkiness. I mean, like I said, you just cannot say that this bottling lacks personality, shall we say. Anyway, let's see what the palate like now. Still heavily sherry, gritty Oloroso kind of tannins, although they're softened somewhat. Green olives, green nuts. Peat has dissipated a little bit. It's more lighter, more smoky, more, I wouldn't quite go as far as saying ethereal, but you kind of get where I'm coming from with regards to that. A little bit of dark chocolate, a little bit of spice on the finish. I mean, again, really intense, but slightly softer, a little bit more approachable now. You add a little drop of water with it, and still pretty dry. Finally, we're on to the 8-year-old. So this is bottled at 57.8. Oh, that's pretty restrained on the ABV, it has to be said. But anyway, so first filter turns. Let's see what the nose goes. Oh, that is intense. Really grapey, winey, honeyed, oxidised apricot, herbal. Oh, look, but get rid of that. No. Again, honeyed. Maybe it's got a tightness to it. I mean that's probably down to the alcohol. But it like I said, it kind of feels tightly wound and really intense. I mean, there's no sulphur notes, and you know, playing around with real sweet wine barriques is often sort of, you know, asking for trouble, because they are very susceptible to sort of bacteria, because of the sort of like the large amount of residual sugar that's left in the cask. But this is stunningly clean. Really quite slightly toasty. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Big, grapey, winey, lots of oxidised honeyed notes, oxidised apple, subtler peat, although it's certainly there. It's more a kind of wispier, medicinal slight peat character. Lovely intensity, a little bit of lime conserve. It's got a real twang to it, it has to be said. Almost verging on the saltiness, it has to be said, although I wouldn't quite say it's saline, but it's kind of got that kind of twang to it. A little bit sort of masked on the finish. I think that's probably going to need a little drop of water. So let's see what that does to it. Again, doesn't make a great deal of difference to the nose. It's still quite grapey, winey, late harvested, honey, still really intense, dark fruit, well, dark-ish kind of fruit, I suppose, and again, still plenty of peat. So, see what the palate like now. Softer, sweeter, rounder, a little bit less peat, but there's still that kind of almost saltiness kind of going on, salty, almost kind of mineral, God, I'm too much alcohol, I can't even speak now. Salty, sort of minerally, slightly herbal, a little bit more kind of vanilla possibly. But the intensity is not even let up with a little bit of water. I mean, it is intense, wonderfully balanced, absolutely stunning. I mean, you know, and I think this is the thing with every release that Power has done. You know, they are nothing less than stellar. I mean, you know, the guy does not release anything that's even remotely poor quality. I mean, the quality is just absolutely up there, and you know, I can understand why he's got such a kind of a following, and why they sell out sort of almost instantaneously back in Sweden. And you know, if you've not encountered or purchased a bottle of Smogen whiskey, you know, I'm going to have to say your life is not complete. But anyway, let's sum today's episode up before I wrap up. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Firstly, a big thank you to Robert from iPhone for the samples for today's episode of the show, and nice generous sized samples they were too. The Diamond Distillery, the Kinghaven Diamond Distillery bottling, just kind of classic Guyana rum, really oily, intense, and just, you know, just a bloody good bottling. The Kinghaven Foursquare, again, I mean, completely different in style, and like I said when I was tasting them, that's the wonderful thing about rums, is for the different characteristics from the different islands, countries that produce these rums. Again, classic Foursquare, really rich, dark, intense, and stunningly good, has to be said. The Single Cask 56 2011, I mean, yeah, a lovely balance, like I said when I was tasting it, between the cask types and the spirit. Just stunning. I mean, you know, absolutely stunning. The 51 2011. I mean, for a sherry cask whiskey, which as you well know, is not my favourite style of whiskey. I thought was really well balanced. I mean, lots of peat, sherry, but also, I mean, I was getting the character of the Smogen style without being completely swamped in sherry. The Sherry Quarters was obviously a lot more heavy on the sherry. I mean, you would expect that. Quarter casks, sherry casks are going to give you more intensity of sherry. But again, I mean, it was, you know, a real intense character. I mean, it was sherry peat, and you know, what's not to love about that kind of stuff at the end of the day. And the 8-year-old, I mean, again, very impressive whiskey, it has to be said. And you know, I've not tasted a whiskey from Smogen that hasn't left me sort of going wow, you know. And if you've not tasted them, you really need to. And well, while we're on the subject of Smogen and Hyphern and what have you, you may or may not know that it's been a kind of something I wanted to do for a number of years, and was put on a whisky festival in Nottingham, because there's been whisky festivals all over the country and all that kind of stuff, and never one in Nottingham. And I really thought that the Nottingham deserved a whisky festival, and I've not had the expertise and the knowledge of doing a whisky festival to be able to sort of do that. But thankfully, a company called the Whisky Lounge, who do have the expertise, are doing one in Nottingham on November the 2nd, and Robert from Hyphern will be there, and maybe have a bottle of Smogen stashed underneath the table, possibly. I mean, I know there's this concept with whisky festivals where you kind of like can taste what's on offer, and then exhibitors have beneath the table bottlings that they kind of bring out. And I'm hoping that obviously Robert will bring along something from Smogen, because I mean, and if you've not tasted Smogen, you really need to, because Smogen whiskies are stunningly good at the end of the day. And I think you really need to sort of save up your pennies and purchase one, because if you love whiskey, then these are stunning whiskies, and the rums are not too bad either. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's probably been a bit of a longer one than usual, but there's been a lot of alcohol in in these samples. So anyway, until next time, all I have to say is good dramming and good afternoon.